welcome back again. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to start using our MovieQuote entity to actually read things from core data. It's kind of funny. You have to be able to read to like get stuff, but to be honest, read isn't much fun until you've also got create. So we're going to make kind of a longer video and try to sneak in both read and create if we can. So the first thing that we want to do is we're going to start adding these things to the table. And there's actually an import that I recommend you do for import core data. There's some things you can do with core data without it. And to be honest, like I have no interest in learning what you can do without it and what you can do with it. Because anytime I'm going to be using core data, I just add it, right? And then you don't even have to know what you're using that wasn't there or was there. But it is kind of weird in Swift to import things. But there is a recommended import for core data. All right, so that was kind of step number one. Step number two is that we need the managed object context. So this is kind of the gateway to using core data is this managed object context. If you remember our very first video lecture where we were breaking the template, there were 3 lines in the app delegate that we commented out. We're going to put those back, so we're going to uncomment them again, and we're going to change the class to MovieQuote's table view controller. So let's just go ahead and do that. That's easy peasy. So here I found those 3 lines. I'm just going to highlight them all, hit Command / to uncomment them, and they fit a lot better if I give them the full width. And this master view controller, that was the name of the master view controller in the template, whereas now we call it MovieQuote's table view controller. So what this is doing is this is getting a reference from the storyboard to the MovieQuote's table view controller, and it's setting a property on it of the managed object context. And that's all well and good, but right now it's complaining that our controller doesn't have this managed object context. So then what we need to do is we need to add a variable called managed object content of type NS managed object context. It's an optional. You don't have to set it to nil by default. I just kind of copied that from some Apple code. So what I want to do in here is I just want to create a variable, and I'm just going to call it the managed object context, and it's of type managed object context. So again, the way to think about it is whenever you pull something out of core data, it becomes a managed object, and then you can like manipulate it and do things with it if you want, and then you can stick it back in. And the kind of like the sandbox where you're manipulating things is a context, and so this is called the managed object context, which is great. Oh, it's yelling at me because I don't have my question mark on there to show that it's an optional, so that's an easy fix there. Great, so now we've got a managed object context. It's being passed in. There's no build errors. But obviously, just having the managed object context doesn't do you much good until you start like using it, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start using it. And in this lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to keep the array around, so we're not ready to like get rid of the array. So we're just going to have a function called update MovieQuote array that's just going to update the array from core data. So let's just go ahead and fix those things next. So I find my view will appear method here. And view will appear is getting ready to reload the table. And just before we do that, we want to say update MovieQuote array. And then we'll just go ahead and stub in that function right here just so it's real close. And that looks terrific. So updating the array, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do a read from core data. Let's just go to the slides and just kind of look at what it looks like. So what it looks like is, first off, we're going to need to know the entity name, which we called it MovieQuote. So I just went ahead and made that a constant. So let's just do that first. We've got kind of our area of constants up here. I'm just going to call it MovieQuote entity name, and I'm just going to type in, MovieQuote. So I probably could have typed MovieQuote successfully everywhere, but it's easier to just kind of do it that way. The next thing we want to do is kind of the hard part. So this is the zoom in of the MovieQuote array. The syntax looks pretty intimidating at first. I get that. But it's really not that bad. So if you kind of think about how things like SQLite would work, you would always prepare a request, and then you would execute that request. And things that have to go into that request are, what type of object do you want to get out? What order do you want your results to be in? And then you have to actually execute it. And you can see those same concepts are here. So you have to create an NS fetch request. You have to say what type of entity you're pulling out. So that's the one thing we just typed. You have to define what the sort order is, and the sort order is going to be based on the key, last touch date time, ascending false, so it's going to put newest on top. So those are kind of like preparing our request. And then the thing that's a little confusing here is that there might be an error when you execute the fetch request. To be honest, you won't see many of these with core data, especially if you're single threaded, but it is good practice to always listen for the error. And it's a little confusing how errors work. You actually pass it in as a pointer. So you say, and error, and that passes in a pointer so that somebody can set the error to be something. And this whole thing, what it says is execute fetch request. What that's going to give you is an array. And I want to go ahead and cast it to say it's not just an array of any objects, it's an array of movie quotes. So at that point, I've got my movie quotes and I've updated the array. And then we're going to check for the error to see if there was a problem. And if there is an error, we're just going to print a log and we're going to intentionally crash the app, right? So a lot of that was new to you. So we're going to actually type it together as well. So I kind of like pseudocode. So prepare the request, execute the request to get an array. And then the last step is to check for errors, right? So those are kind of the steps that we're going to have to go through. So preparing the request. So I'll just kind of make it pop in here. So we've got a fetch request, so an NS fetch request of the name MovieQuote. The next thing we want to do is we want to define the order. So the order is going to be based on the key, last touch date time. Obviously, I could have turned this into a constant, but I happen to know that I think this is the only time I type it, so I just kind of cheated and just made it a string. The order is ascending false. So that actually takes care of preparing the request. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually execute the request. So what this is going to do is this is going to give us movie quotes. So we're going to say managed object context, execute fetch request. So the fetch request that it's going to execute is the one we just made, right? So fetch request. And then what it wants is it actually wants an error in case something went wrong. Technically what it wants is it wants an error pointer. So we're just going to have to make an error of type NS error. I'll make it optional. And then we're going to pass in a pointer to it. We haven't done anything with passing pointers before, but you just say and in front works just like it did in C. Swift just copied that directly in. If you think about it, it's actually a pointer to a reference, which is really a pointer to a pointer. It sounds weird, but that's actually how iOS has always done error handling. It's going to return an array of any objects. We, of course, want to cast that to an array of movie quotes. Next thing that you need to do is you need to handle the error. So you just can say, if the error is not equal to nil, so that means it exists, you can print out a message. So we're just going to print out the message. So I'm just going to paste it in here. We're just going to print out the error. To be honest, this is going to be pretty hard to replicate, so I don't care that much about what you type in here. You could have also passed in nil and just not worried about the errors. And to be honest, I do that all the time, but I wanted to kind of show you best practice things, right? And then to be honest, this error is so bad that as you're doing development, just crash the app, right? And you can just crash the app by saying abort. So if this error ever does happen, just crash the app. I think if you ship an app to the App Store, these automatically get removed for you, but typically you don't crash the app in your production version. But it's great for checking. So I guess I kind of cheated here in my pattern because I checked for errors up there. But I've done the important steps. I've created the fetch request, and then I've executed it, and then I checked to see if there was an error. But to be honest, there probably won't be. So that actually is a big step, right? So we've checked off read, and we probably could stop this video there, but it turns out that read isn't much fun without create, right? So if you run it right now, so it just doesn't have any quotes and it doesn't have any way to make quotes. One thing I will recommend, and we may as well do it now, is go ahead and make sure you've reset your simulator. So make sure you click on iOS Simulator, reset content and settings, and make sure you reset it. And that's important because, if you changed the data store model, which we've done, you need to make sure to reset your app so it doesn't crash due to old data being saved. And that's just a good thing to do. Notice that I did it while I was running, so it crashed me here. All right, that was a tangent. What I meant to do is I meant to get on to creating. So creating, just to kind of sneak it in now, the idea is that you have to, when you create a managed object, you do it with relationship to core data, so that way it kind of knows where it's going to get saved, and you actually put it into the managed object context, such that whenever you write to it and you say save, it'll actually save the quote to core data correctly. So it's not hard, it's just the syntax is probably nothing you would guess. So you can see that here's the way you do it. So you say new movie quote, you say NS entity description, which I don't know why it's on that class, but it is, dot insert new object for entry for name. So you pass it a name, you pass it what context it's going to be in, and then it's going to give you back a movie quote. It's actually going to give you an any object, so we're going to have to cast it to a movie quote. And then we're going to just set the fields, so that's exactly as expected. And then we're going to basically have to hit save. So we're going to save the managed object context, and then we're going to re-update our array. So these are the things we're going to do over in our create quote action. So let's go find that method. So it's inside our show add dialog, and then inside our create quote action, this is where we created a quote before, and here's where we're going to create a new quote. So the way this works is we said new movie quotes. We have to create a new one, and the syntax is probably not what you would guess. It's a NS entity description. Get some more room here. NS entity description, insert new object for name, and we need the name of the string. You could just type it in, right? So the name was movie quote. That would be fine. But it actually is better to make these constants, right? So, let's just go ahead and add a quote. Oh, we've already got one. Entity name. That was unnecessary. So I could just say movie quote entity name. I forgot I had done that before. In managed object context, since we're in a closure, we have to say self dot managed object context. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to cast it. So we want to say as movie quote. It's probably yelling at me because I need an exclamation point on the managed object context. Instead of me doing it, I'm just going to click on the error and see what it recommends. And sure enough, it asks, would you like to put an exclamation point on there, which is great. And then it also is yelling at me for self and a closure. So I've got two problems. So I need the word self. Sorry, I was kind of rapping crazy here. I don't really know how to fix the wrapping. I guess I could use more lines. Self dot movie quote entity name, and then self dot managed object context, and then there it's going to do the auto fix for me of saying exclamation point. There's all kinds of things we could have done with a managed object context. One trick we could have done is we could have actually put an exclamation point on it here. That would have made it an optional that's automatically unboxed, and that would have worked out fine. But I have to put it on here. All right, so this creates a new movie quote that's set up correctly for core data, ye goodness. And then what we want to do is we just want to grab the quote from the text field and set that property. Same with the movie from the movie text field, of course. So set that one. And then we've also got this last touch date time. And what we want to do is we just want to set it to right now. The easiest way to set it to right now is just to create a new NS date. So we'll just kind of tack that on there. Next thing we want to do is we want to actually save the managed object context. It's pretty easy, but we're going to put it into a function. So save managed object context. And I only said self dot because I'm in a closure. And then I'm just going to make this function, outside of any method, just so it quits yelling at me. And I'll go do it in a minute, right? So that's going to save it. So it's going to take the managed object, actually write it to core data. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to actually update the array. You might notice that there's a little bit of inefficiency going on here. So if like we have 1,000,000 quotes and we add just one, we're actually kind of like throwing away everything we knew, and we're just, doing a brand new read. And there is some efficiency that will improve later. What I want to do, because we're getting really close to doing this, is I just want to save the managed object context. Some of the lessons we learned before are actually useful again here, and that's this whole concept of error handling. So I'm actually just going to copy it from what we did before, but instead of this line, right, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to say managed object context save. So the method is just called save. And then he needs a pointer to an error, which I'll just pass in there. So I copied from above and below how to do the error handling, because it's an easy way to do it. Note you could also do the error handling in a different way. This save function, it actually returns true or false. And so it returns, I think it's false if there's an error. For some reason I can never remember that, so I always just check the error after. But if you like the other style, you can do that as well. So I'm excited about this. We've actually done create and read. And if I click on add, I should be able to add earmuffs from old school. And I should be able to hit create quote, and it should be there. It did that before. What it didn't do before is if you hit stop and then you hit play, it should actually still be there, right? And so it's still there. So that's pretty cool. So I'll add another one. I'll add Yo Adrian and create that quote. And again, the real magic is if you stop it and hit play again, then the movie quote comes back, right? Because it's actually being saved in core data. So this is a really simple example of actually saving something to core data and seeing how that works. All right, so that's all we've got this time. Come back next time and we'll figure out delete and we'll figure out edit. All right, see you then.